These were, by reputation, the smartest men who ever worked on Wall Street. 2 Nobel Prize winners, a former vice chairman of the Federal Reserve, the greatest bond trader of his generation. Together, they built a machine that, on paper, could not lose. In just 4 months, it lost $4.5 billion, and very nearly took down the entire global financial system. This is the LTCM File. The story starts in 1994 with a man named John Meriwether. He had been the legendary head of bond trading at Salomon Brothers, the trader immortalized in the book Liar's Poker as the coolest gambler on Wall Street. Now he set out to build his own hedge fund, and he did not recruit ordinary people. He recruited gods. Onto the roster came Myron Scholes and Robert Merton, 2 economists so brilliant they would win the Nobel Prize in 1997 for inventing the math behind modern options. They won it while working at the fund. Add a former vice chairman of the Federal Reserve, and Meriwether's old all-star team of traders, and the press called it, without irony, the best finance faculty in the world. The fund was called Long-Term Capital Management. Their strategy sounded boring, and that was the point. It was called convergence arbitrage. They hunted for tiny, almost invisible price gaps between bonds that should have been worth nearly the same, and bet that those gaps would close. The profit on each trade was microscopic. Meriwether himself compared it to a giant vacuum, sucking up nickels that nobody else could even see. There is another, more famous way to describe it: picking up nickels in front of a steamroller. Because a nickel is not much money. To turn tiny edges into enormous profits, you need to do it with a staggering amount of borrowed money. And for the first few years, it worked beyond anyone's dreams. 21% the first year, 43% the next, then 40%. The smartest men alive had turned Wall Street into a machine that printed money, and the world lined up to hand them more. Now here's the scale of the bet they were making. On roughly $4.7 billion of their own capital, they were controlling around $125 billion in assets, leverage of about 25 to 1. And through complex derivatives, their total exposure ran to something near $1.25 trillion. That number is what terrified regulators, because it tied long-term capital management to virtually every major bank on Wall Street at once. Their models said this was safe. The bets were spread across dozens of different unrelated markets, and the math said those markets would never all move against them at the same time. But there was a flaw hiding inside that confidence. The models had been built on a few calm years of data. They had never, ever seen a true panic. Then the panic came. First, the Asian financial crisis rattled the markets in 1997. And then, on August 17, 1998, Russia did the unthinkable. It defaulted on its own debt. Across the planet, terrified investors dumped everything risky and ran for the safety of United States government bonds. A stampede the traders call a flight to quality. And in that stampede, the one thing the model swore could never happen, happened. Every single one of long-term capital's supposedly unrelated bets began to move the same direction, against them, all at once. The diversification they had counted on was an illusion, and it vanished at the exact moment they needed it most. Quick one. If this story is landing for you, hit subscribe and smash that like button and tell me in the comments which collapse I should open next. It genuinely helps the channel grow. Okay, back to the file. The losses were breathtaking. $4.6 billion gone in under 4 months. On one single day, they lost $550 million. Their capital cratered from $4.7 billion down to about $400 million. And because the losses were eating the equity underneath those still massive positions, their leverage didn't just rise, it exploded to something like 250 to 1. The steamroller had arrived. And this is the part that made it a national emergency. That $1.25 trillion of exposure meant long-term capital was not a single fund quietly dying in a corner. It was wired into nearly every major bank in America. If it collapsed and defaulted, it could drag those banks down with it, one after another, in a chain reaction. This was no longer a bad trade. It was a lit fuse running toward the whole financial system. So on September 23rd, 1998, something almost unheard of happened. The president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York called 14 of the biggest banks and brokerages on Wall Street into a single conference room and pressured them to save the very thing that could destroy them all. Together, they put in around $3.5 billion to take over the fund and wind it down slowly, carefully, before it could explode. Not $1 of it was taxpayer money. It was the banks bailing out the bomb wired to their own front doors. The smartest men in the world had to be rescued by the very institutions their genius nearly detonated. That's what I want you to take out of this file. The lesson is not that smart people are secretly dumb. It is that being smart is not the same thing as surviving. Long-term capital had the best minds on Earth, and they still nearly blew up the world, for 3 reasons that repeat in almost every disaster since. First, leverage does not add risk, it multiplies it. Borrowed money makes you look brilliant on the way up and bankrupt on the way down. The exact same trade. Second, a model only knows the past. The rare violent event was not in their data, so their math priced it at nearly 0. And reality does not care what your spreadsheet assumes. And the third lesson is the one that costs people everything. Diversification is a fair weather friend. In a real panic, everything you own moves together. The precise moment you most need your bets to be independent is the moment they all become the same bet. So the goal was never to be the smartest person in the market. The goal is to size your bets so that a once-in-a-decade shock cannot end you, and to assume always that the improbable will eventually happen, because over a long enough life, it always does. If you want to actually learn to think about risk this way, about surviving first and winning second, I'll leave a resource I trust down in the description. If you made it this far, you are exactly my kind of person. Subscribe, drop a comment, and help this channel grow. New files coming very soon. Picking up nickels in front of a steamroller works. It works for years. It made the smartest men alive look like geniuses. Right up until the single day it didn't, and they needed 14 banks in a room to keep the whole world from going down with them. The goal is not to be the smartest money in the market. It is to still be in the market after the smart money gets carried out.